France, this was medieval France, numbering as many as 100,000 souls. It was not to be a day of rest, but of unprecedented unrest. They were praying in the synagogue when the raid began. In cities and towns throughout the kingdom, agents of King Louis IX of France burst through the doors of Jewish houses of prayer and seized thousands of hapless prisoners. All the detainees were transported to Paris, where they were held in convents under strict guard to await their trial on accusations of grave crimes. For 3 long months, they languished in captivity until their collective trial began. Meanwhile, the Jews of the kingdom gathered continuously to storm the heavens on their behalf with fasting and prayer. 4 of the greatest luminaries of the French Jewish community, led by the highly respected Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, served as the prisoners' legal defense. Following the trial, the judges continued to debate the case for another 2 years, while European Jewry held its breath. Finally, in June 1242, 24 wagons and tightly packed convicts rolled into Place de Grave, causing the Jews of France to emit a collective groan of horror. Place de Grave was a public square along the banks of the Seine River, notorious as the historic site of public executions, hangings, beheadings, and burnings at the stake. Throngs of Parisians lined the streets to enjoy the spectacle, while those of the Jewish faith remained hidden, terrified to venture from their home. The prisoners had been found guilty and had been sentenced to extermination through public burning. The evil verdict was carried out with glee. But as they were consigned to the flames, there were no cries of agony or despair, nor was there a smell of burning flesh, because the prisoners were not people, they were books. Thousands upon thousands of handwritten scrolls and codices, every copy of the Talmud that the king's agents could find in France, almost all of which had been sheltered in the nation's synagogues, had been arrested, put on trial, and condemned to public burning. The Jewish tradition was consigned to the fire that day, and as angry flames roared at their ancient wisdom, as their teachings rose as ash, and an inferno ingested their spiritual treasures, the Jewish communities of France were singed with grief and flung into mourning for their executed pages, for their martyred beliefs.
So actually, that community in France in the 1200s was a massive, big Jewish community, but not just in size. It was a major community in its importance in the Jewish world. Many of the sorry, let me just get rid of this. It happened in many communities. This particular one was it was witnessed by one of the foremost Talmud scholars at the time. His name was the Maharam from Rottenburg, even though he lived in France. But he witnessed this when he was 20 years old. He saw the burning, and he wrote one of we say a lot of kind of eulogies on Tisha B'Av in the Kinnis. So one of the Kinnises is about the books. So next time you're reading from the eulogies on Tisha B'Av, you'll see that it's talking about it's on page in your books, it's on page 3 of your textbooks. This poem that he wrote, this to eulogize the burning of the Talmud, it really affected him very deeply, and affected the Jewish community very deeply. They lost something very, very, very profound. These are handwritten manuscripts. How many of them could there have been already? Each one represented, the thousands of years of scholarship work and toil, and it was just burnt. So you can skim the poem. I'll read a couple of lines of it. Can somebody get the door? I'll wait. Um, I'll just read this poem while he's um I will shed tears until they surge like a stream that will reach the graves of your noble princes, Moses and Aaron on the mountain before. And I will inquire them, will a new version of the Torah be given? Is that why your columns were permitted to be burned? My soul is astonished. Can edibles ever taste sweet to my palate, now that I have watched how they gathered your treasure into the city square like the penalty of a Jewish city that strayed to idolatry and burned the supernal treasure? So to witness the burning of the Talmud, it was considered tantamount to those Jews as all the other things in the Kinnis, the massacre of Jews, the imprisonment, the torture, the destruction of the temple, which is the main reason for mourning of Tisha B'Av, and this is right there with it. Um, so and this hi, welcome.
I got the class.
What's
The
that?
rabbi told me it started at 7:30.
Oh, which rabbi? Rabbi Darren or Rabbi
Edelman.
Edelman? Oh, I don't know why. So yeah,
Sorry. Okay.
yeah, but we're just talking about how the Talmud was so how the burning of the Talmud was so traumatic to the Jewish community, and the reason for that is because the Talmud wasn't just a book, and it wasn't just information, and it wasn't just um, things that it didn't just have important religious ideas in it, but it was a way of life for the Jewish people. It always has been since the for the 15 centuries from its from its since its composition, it's always been part of our kind of connection in our life source, and that's why it was so important. Um, and they developed a whole culture around studying Talmud. It's not just reading it, right? There's its own language, its own hand motions, its own tone, its own. There's a whole style of learning that developed around it. Oh, I found this picture. Somebody I know actually was visiting a museum somewhere, and he happened upon this fragment of a Talmud from France from that time period. Had some evidence of burning on it. It could be survived from there, or it's just a different. We don't know, but that's an old Talmud from the 1200s. Um, this is actually a recording from the 1900s, early 1900s, of people learning Talmud. They're using a specific tune that's kind of extinct now. You can't really find this, but it's interesting. There's different communities that have different tunes, but they used to learn it like a song. They didn't just read it. So let me play that. So it's like how do you learn that? Imagine opening up like a physics book or something like that and just reading. And Isaac Newton says that the coefficient of the acceleration. No, I don't know, making stuff up. But the point is, the love and the passion and the soul. You see that it's not just a law book. So what's with it? Hopefully we'll get a taste of that. Hopefully we'll get an inkling into what this is. King David said it in Psalms on page 5 in text 2. He said this famous line reflecting on Torah study. Lule seirascha shashuei az avadati bani. Had your Torah not been my delight, I would have perished in my suffering. La'olam lo eshkach pekudecha kivam chiyisani. I will never forget your precepts, for through them you preserved my life. The Torah has not just been it's a preservative of Jewish identity. It's a preservative of joy also of like the Jewish people lived in the Talmud, lived in the Torah in general, but really in the Talmud. And we'll talk about that. Why is the Talmud that's the when we say Torah, we're really talking about most of the time learning Torah, we're talking about Talmud study, and we'll see why. But actually, a great Jewish historian, Cecil Roth, he actually reflected on on the role of the Talmud throughout Jewish history and how it preserved the Jewish identity and the Jewish people physically because of the ability for us to be able to shelter, to find solace, and to find ourselves in the most dire circumstances in the pages of the Talmud. So let's take a look at what he wrote in his A Short History of the Jewish People. Something tells me it's not a short book. Page 6, text 3. The importance in Jewish life of the Talmud is not by any means purely academic. It comprises the accumulated wisdom of the Jewish people over many generations. The period of its redaction coincided with the growth of independent centers of life in far distant regions, cut off politically and linguistically from the former nuclei. The Jewish people was about to enter on an entirely different phase of its being in countries of which their fathers have never heard. In the face of difficulties hitherto unimaginable, but they possessed to bring with them into their new existence a code, not merely of religion or of law, but of civilization. The Talmud gave the Jew a fatherland which he can carry about with him when his own land was lost, and if he was able to maintain his identity in the course of the long centuries to come, under conditions such as no other people has ever been able to surmount, it is with the Talmud, above all, that the credit lies. And there's a quote from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who wrote a lot on the Talmud. He translated the Talmud. He did a lot of work with the Talmud, kind of his work, his life's work. He said that no Jewish community that was cut off from the Talmud was able to endure. That means any Jew that's alive today or that knows they're a Jew today is very deeply connected to the Talmud. His ancestors were, because if they weren't, there would be no trace of them. Because so really it's very central to the Jewish survival. So and you can see also in Jewish culture, even people who don't live according to the full scope of halacha and everything that's in the Talmud, there is no denying that the influence on the culture, on Jewish culture, that's in the Talmud, the mannerisms, the style of thinking, the emphasis on education, debate, finding the truth, all these things, and we'll talk about this more in other lessons. All these things are clearly sourced. Even Jewish humor, some have pointed to the Talmud, and there's a lot of sarcasm there. Someone who reads the Talmud, you'll find great insults. You'll find a lot of things, and the style of Jewish humor. It's very very easy to find that there. So in the next 6 weeks, we'll try to get a good glimpse of these. So let's course overview. So the Talmud is mostly law. We'll be talking about which types of laws, what's the scope of it, and what type of law are we referring to, and things like that. In class 2, the Mishnah, we'll learn about what the Mishnah was, how it came to be, what it's all about. Then we have the next 3, 4, and 5 are all different parts of Gemara, right? So we'll learn about the people whose teachings the Gemara records, the people who compiled the Gemara. We'll find out how the Gemara operates. We'll discover that it's a text that may be unique in human society. And we'll learn some important principles of Talmudic thinking. And best of all, we'll roll up our sleeves and actually dive into the Talmud. And in lesson 6, we'll see how it permeated and influenced Jewish life. We'll dive deeply into that. We'll see how interpreting the Talmud and building on the Talmud and expanding on the Talmud is really the task that continues till today. And it's not just a book that we're learning, but it's a book that we are continuing to contribute to and figure out. So it's very alive. Okay, so let's get into it. What is the Talmud? So here you have on page 8, 10 useful facts about the Talmud. Okay, you could skim that. I'm not going to read each one. Just take a minute and look at that. Maybe I will say some of them. When I say Talmud, the term Talmud refers to 2 pieces. It's referring to the Mishnah, which we'll learn more about what is the Mishnah. But the Mishnah, every page of Talmud, or many pages of the Talmud start with, many parts of the Talmud starts with the Mishnah, and then it analyzes that Mishnah. So the Talmud is, and that's called the Gemara. The Gemara is the part that analyzes the Mishnah, and it's all in one book called the Talmud. You can buy a Mishnah by itself, but you can't really buy a Gemara by itself. But the Talmud is those 2 pieces combined. There's actually 2 Talmuds. One was made in Israel 100 years before, and then the Babylonian Talmud was made after that. There's approximately 120 sages called Tanaim. Those are the ones that wrote the Mishnah. Then you have approximately 800 sages who contributed to the Gemara, analyzing the Mishnah. It's a lot of people. You have 63 sections, 63 books in the Gemara. Okay, we'll move on from that.
So
Any questions?
What
Yeah.
version do we use? The Babylonian?
We can use both. The one that's most authoritative is Babylonian. It's the most. It covers the most. Jerusalem Talmud is sparse and it's a totally different style. It's not as extensive and it's a totally different. We'll actually learn the mystical reasons why the Talmud Bavli looks the way it does versus the Talmud Yerushalmi, which is the Yerushalayim Talmud. We'll learn about those different. There's actually spiritual differences between the two, and we should learn both. But the one that's really the one that we're talking about always is going to be the Babylonian Talmud, right?
That was the books that you had on this
Yeah.
display.
Yeah. This is the English translation of it, which is a monumental accomplishment in Jewish history. This is not just a translation, but it's also elucidating it in an extremely, extremely accessible way, without losing its depth. And it's just unbelievable. Teams of people worked on this for years. They just finished the entire thing. Recently. It's not been that many years. Yeah. So it's a really incredible time to live in for Jewish scholarship. We've come from them carting away, uh, handwritten scrolls in France to this being on an iPad. Pretty cool. Anyways, so the best way to start, by the way, the term, I just want to teach you a key term that I'll be using a lot. Halacha means Jewish law, or it literally means the way. Like halacha, it's the way we do things, right? It's just the path, the way. So let's take some to really get an idea of the scope of what Talmud is going to be covering. What is it talking about? Let's look at some samples, and each sample is going to be like it's a couple of lines, but it tells us, it gives you a sense, an idea of the types of topics that we'll address and the categories of Jewish law that we'll be talking about. It's important to note that each one of these things entails a very broad discussion that's on the page of the Talmud. And you can see, actually, you could do this as an exercise. Try to find, when you read these, the ambiguity there begs some questions. And that's why you need to kind of learn the Talmud to kind of figure out what's actually saying. So let's look at text 4a on page 9. It talks about the time. It's talking about, this is in the tractate of Pesachim that deals everything with Pesach-related laws, right? So it says, on the eve of Passover, we may not eat from close to the time of Mincha until it's dark, to ensure a hearty appetite for eating matzah at the Passover Seder later that night. Right? We're supposed to have a Seder, and we have to eat a lot at the Seder. So there's this rule that's in the Talmud: you should not eat from Mincha until it's dark. Don't stop eating. Don't ruin your appetite. So, can anyone see any ambiguity here? Any questions that might make this hard to apply or to practice in your situation?
Well, the time of Mincha could change.
What is the time of Mincha, right? What does that mean? Is that a set time? What is that time? Good question. Any other things that we might be missing in order to be able to do this?
Yeah, let's see. Any time as well? Dark? What do you mean by dark?
Yeah, that could also be, yeah. Let's just say, yeah,
Yeah, time.
right. You can also drill into everything, but there's even bigger ambiguities here. Does this apply to only Passover? It isn't there's a lot of holidays that you have to eat something does it apply to other holidays maybe?
Is it just eating or eating and drinking or
Right. How much eating? Is it?
So you go to Seder first, so can you really focus on the Seder
If you're starving?
waiting till
Good question. Right. So maybe if you're starving, you should be able to eat. Right? You're not supposed to go to the Seder starving. These are great questions. And you'll probably do the entire first part of the Haggadah. You'll be hangry. So how intense is this law? So all this stuff
Also, I guess
yeah.
this is just a rule of thumb, because that's the purpose It may not be an issue for many people.
Right. Some people
So,
are
yeah.
they're always eating.
Yeah.
They'll be fine.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we have to know the scope of it. We have to know the details of it. We have to know everything, all of that stuff. So if you're actually going to live with this stuff, you really got to figure it out, right?
Does this only refer to masa? That's also a good question.
Right.
It's like around the corner, right? It's like you aren't even close to eating something that's prohibited during Pesach.
This, I don't know if this is related. That's an interesting question because you're eating before Pesach. You're saying if you're eating before Pesach, maybe you should stop eating bichlal. You should stop eating completely so that you don't even eat chametz,
Yeah.
because that's an interesting point. But they did make a rule about that you're supposed to stop eating chametz
Right.
way before it becomes prohibited, right? And that's actually a rabbinic enactment to protect against eating chametz. So yes, there is another rule. So this rule is not that. Very good. Let's look at another area, totally different category of Jewish law on text 4b. This is in Bava Metzia, which is commonly the first type of the first tractate someone will start learning 5th or 6th grade, maybe 4th grade. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. Actually, if you look, I forgot what it's called. Are any teachers? Any teachers here? Shale is a teacher technically. Yeah, right. Are you a teacher also? Okay. So, what's her name again? Sorry, Kristen. Nice to meet you. So, and you're a teacher.
Yeah.
Or
I forgot about that.
but there's like this way of category. What is it called? Bloom's something taxonomy. Yeah. So there's different levels of thinking, and I looked at I was looking at it, and I'm pretty sure we teach the highest level to 4th graders because of Talmud. Like there's okay. Well, I don't remember it, so look it up and you'll see. Fine. Text 4b. If one hires skilled workers and they deceived each other, they have only a right to complain, but not to pursue a financial claim. Okay, I don't even have to ask you guys like what the ambiguity is. I don't even know what it's talking about. Right? What is this talking about? How do they deceive each other? What is this right to complain? What value is that? What, right? So, what financial loss has there been? What's that, Yosef?
Somebody lost an object because
Mhm.
that's what Mitzvah is about.
Right.
And
Oh,
somebody
that's a
lost
good
it.
point.
I think somebody took it, so now he's trying to like sue the person, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good assumption because of which tractate it's in. There's a lot of lost objects there. There's also a lot of other types of things there. A lot of the laws that in that tractate have to do with transferable, movable property and either losing them or or entrusting it to somebody and things like that. Okay, next category, immersion times. All who are obligated to ritually immerse, meaning going into a special mikvah, a pool of water, the rainwater, must do so during the day, with the exception of a woman who is a nida or a yoledet, which is someone who's post-menstruation or post-birth, who must ritually immerse at night. So immersion, in order to be biblically, in order for it to be effective, it has to be during the day. Except for those two categories, must be during the night. You have to wait till nightfall and go to the mikvah. I think actually it will work if you do it during the day, but this is the general rule. Again, a lot of things that you can go into and try to expound on. Next one, text 4d. Every Jewish individual has a share in the world to come. As it is stated, your people are all righteous. This is in Sanhedrin. Did you get up to this yet, Irv? No.
Not there yet.
Okay. They will inherit the land forever. They are the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, in which I take pride. This is in Isaiah. So we have these different. These are very categorically types of different areas of Jewish law. Not even all Jewish law. The first three are Jewish law. The last one is something different. It's kind of ethics. It's kind of religious ideas, spiritual teachings, stories, and the Talmud could be split into these these two types of categories. You have the halacha, and you have the Agadita. Agadita means it's more lessons, stories, teachings, and some of them are very deep and mystical and hard to understand, and some of them are just very strange. Also, those are very, there's a lot of hidden meaning there. We're going to focus now, and most of the course, we'll have a course on lesson 4 more about Agadata, but this is going to be, there's a whole JLI course about Agadata, by the way, if anyone's interested. But those are the hardest things because it's just very hard to understand. But we'll mostly be talking about the legal analysis, which is the bulk of the Gemara, right? It's kind of a third, three. I'm sorry, a third of it is Agadata, or maybe a quarter, depending on how you categorize it. Okay. Now, this is this is talking about the makeup.
Sorry, what is the Haggadah again?
Agadata is the kind of stories and not legal teachings.
Okay,
They're not legal, right? They're you can't even derive law from them. You can derive lessons from them. You can derive deep secrets of the Torah or about God from them. You can't really take law from them because they're not meant for that. They're not clear enough. They're not they're very shrouded, their meaning. Yeah. Okay. By the way, there's a lot of directions this can go, and if you guys like, I'll we're gonna be there's a whole course that comes before this course about the oral law and its validity and its development and its structure and all that stuff. We can't go into all of it now, but if you have questions about that come up while I'm talking, now's the time. I don't want this just to be all lecture and whatever, stick to the program, because this type of thing, if you have questions, it's really the type of course to ask them, because this is the Talmud after all. Okay, so and Talmud is not taught with a guy in the front and just talking. That's not how it works. Fine. I've gotten into fist fights with my teachers. I'm kidding, I have not, but but we'll learn about the intensity of Talmud study, how it gets. But it's anyway, so what kind of laws are we talking about? So we talked about laws. When we say laws, we talk about preventing harm, defining societal obligations, regulating social interactions. Secular law usually is kind of those categories. When we talk about Torah laws, right, we include religious obligations to God, behaviors that aren't really specific to affecting other people, like they're not affecting society, like kosher laws, right? This book is actually about kosher. This one. Got all this. Oh, I thought there would be pictures in here, but and different forbidden relationships, all sorts of things. The Nida laws, those are all more, and you also have regulating the special days. You have the special holidays of all the times and everything, and you also have agricultural laws, and you have temple laws, all the sacrifices, all the things that you can do and can't do in the temple, how to do the service, major topic. And then you have the laws of purity. How do you become impure or pure? These are all relevant typically with service in the temple, which is not practiced today because we don't have a temple. So really that section of Jewish law is very it doesn't really apply nowadays. I just said six categories, and the Mishnah is split into these 6 categories of Jewish law. Not If you didn't catch all 6, it's fine. It's just giving you a glimpse of that. We'll get more into that when we talk about Mishnah. There's a lot of criticism of this idea, what I just said, which is that all these things that our laws cover, right? Some of it is like it's like overly legalistic. It's like at there's just so much law, and a lot of people over the centuries have criticized Judaism for being overly legalistic, and maybe it covers over some of the spirituality and some of the connection to the meaning and the spirit of everything, if you're just focused on all these details. So, it's actually a legendary story told about one of the Emperor Franz Joseph, 19th century ruler of Austro-Hungarian. Yeah. And he was pretty friendly to the Jews, they say. And people didn't like that, so they tried to convince him that the Jewish people are kind of backwards. And so they said to him, they picked a law in the Talmud, which is, by the way, the Talmud is a target for anti-Semites, and it's really interesting what they do. But they picked a law in the Talmud, and does anyone guess from the picture which law they picked? Who's
Not worthy.
not, no, no, no.
Well,
It's a much simpler law.
I'm not allowed to untie your laces if the ruler says something.
No, no. Okay, I'll say even simpler. So it says in the Talmud that it says in Jewish law that you're supposed to, when you put your shoes on in the morning, you put on the right shoe
Yes.
first, you put on the left shoe, tie the left shoe, and then tie the right shoe. Okay? The reason for that is because the right side is considered more important and more it's considered it's the side of kindness by the way, for lefties it's just reversed. Everything is reversed, but the right side is considered given deference, so we do things with our right first. We even button our shirts right over left if you have the right shirts, but not if you don't. But and the left side is more important for tying because we tie with our left hand our tefillin. So the Talmud says that's the hand that should get the preference. So it's so pedantic, it's so specific, it's so mundane, it's so ridiculous. So they said to this king, look at these people. They think that God cares how they tie their shoes. And Franz Joseph said, on the contrary, this is beautiful, right? They show every act that they do, even putting on their shoes, they're connecting to the will of God. They're connecting that with their relationship with God, all the way down to their shoelaces. So you could look at it both ways. You could say we're way too OCD, or you could say we think about God a lot in every facet of our life. All right. And so it's beautiful how broad the scope of Jewish law is, but we still have two major questions, right? Where did this body of law come from? And we'll answer this to a limited extent, and you can, if you have any questions about it, feel free to ask on that if I didn't cover something that you are wondering about. And two, why is a book of law such an important part of Judaism, right? Okay, I explained how it had an effect on us and everything, but why is this made as the central pillar of Jewish practice? It's a Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. We talk about the right side being the kindness and the left side being the restriction. The gevura, it's the part of so God, our attributes, our personalities actually reflecting, and it's actually like a micro version of God's. God also has kind of these traits, so to speak, on a higher and more abstract and a more spiritual, ruchnistic level. So we so God also has a right hand, so to speak, not literally, but in a way. Great. So let's talk about the oral law and what is it and where did it come from and how did it develop. Okay. Um, so why do we need another book of law, right? Why did they write this Talmud? Why do they have to overcomplicate Judaism? Okay, so the truth is there's a lot of wisdom in there, but it's not the wisdom of the sages. It's really their attempt to record the will of God. When the Torah was given to Moshe and to the Jewish people, it was given as two pieces. One has the written part, which is really the cliff notes and the abridged type of basic skeleton of the. It's also the basis, but it's of the law, right? Torah means law, right? And at the same time, it was given with the mitzvah. The mitzvot is actually a reference to the oral law, how to do all the laws, how to do the mitzvot, how do you read the Torah? All that stuff was all told to Moshe. If it wasn't told to him, it would be very ridiculous because you can't really understand the Torah as an independent book. You can actually create 150,000 different religions from the same book. Obviously, it had obviously when it was revealed, it was also understood a certain way, and that way it was passed down generation after generation as the oral Torah. Okay, and you can see a reference to this. I'm sorry, Maimonides talks about this process in. He actually goes at very huge length describing the exact structure of the oral Torah, very in depth. It might be in your appendix, introduction to the Mishnah by Maimonides.
Necessary to really understand, like for example, Shabbos, right?
Yeah, yeah, good.
Shabbos is in the
Yeah. It doesn't say anything. Yeah, you can't actually have a religion based on the Torah because it doesn't say how to do any of the mitzvos. It just says to do them, and it gives maybe some vague ideas about them. How to do lula esrog? What's an esrog? What's an etrog? What's a beautiful fruit? Take a beautiful fruit. Doesn't say. Make a sukkah. Doesn't say how to make a sukkah, what a sukkah is, when to make it, how to make it, what it has to be made out of, and all that stuff. Just says to make it. So obviously they knew what they were doing, and they passed that information down every generation. Let's read Maimonides' description of it. Page 13, text 5. All the commandments that were given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai were recorded in the 5 books of Moses, were presented to Moses along with their detailed explanations that were not recorded in those books. The Torah itself refers to this in its statement, I will give you the tablets of stone and the Torah and the mitzvos, as if it's a separate thing, right? In this context, the phrase the Torah refers to the written law. The phrase the mitzvah refers to the explanation of the written law. God commanded us to fulfill the Torah in accordance with the mitzvah. And it is the latter instructions that we refer to as the oral law, Torah Sheba'al Peh. It was not written down. It was too big to be written down. It was too complex to be written down. And it was also, we'll talk about, well, in short, writing something down that's meant to be a living, breathing practice that is it's so complex and so nuanced and so attuned to the situation. So it has to be taught by a teacher to a student, and the students have to understand it. And when you write it down, you're actually putting it at the mercy of the reader. You lose control. You lose that connection with the student, and you lose that ability to teach it in the way that it was meant to be transmitted. And that's why the oral law was prohibited. We'll learn about this in lesson 2 more, but it was prohibited to write it down. Okay, so the statement by the Rambam reflects the Jewish tradition that is recorded in the Talmud, and obviously, some people might say, isn't it convenient that the rabbinic teachings all came from God, but he forgot to put it in the Torah, right? But I mean, he could have just written all it in the Torah, right? But if you look at a Gemara, you look at a Mishnah, you'll see that none of these details could have been written down in the Torah at this length and in this way, in this complexity. And there's a whole course on this, so maybe we'll do that also at a later date. But needless to say, the people, the sages and the people who learned the Jewish people throughout the histories throughout the centuries that learned the oral Torah, they knew that they needed to learn the oral Torah to understand the written Torah. There wasn't any real question about that. They had a clear understanding of where it was coming from. Yeah.
I talked about maybe there's misunderstandings in reading
Yes.
that might be written, but
Yes.
we in our modern society we have a saying for like there's a saying about telephone or
Broken telephone.
yeah.
Yeah.
So one person A says something to person B says something to person C.
So writing it
By
down
the time you
mitigates
get
that.
to Z,
Yeah.
it's a completely different story.
Right.
And if you write it down, you're absolutely right. It can be misinterpreted. Today, the Constitution of the United States is interpreted different ways.
Right.
But at least there's a record that you can go back to the 1700s for the United States, or you can go back to thousands of years for the Jewish law.
Right.
And then you can discuss about
Right.
how to interpret it. But at least there's a record from the beginning.
Right.
Versus somebody saying something that gets misinterpreted by somebody, and then they translate the information in their own manner to someone else who may not understand the original intent.
Right. So yeah, that is a good question with when you're talking about oral transmission, right? How do you know that it was accurate, transmitted accurately? I might touch on this point in the next couple minutes but it's a long discussion of how to show the veracity and how to show the accuracy of our understanding of the written Torah. One of the things you might notice is that the Talmud is full of debate, figuring out exactly how things are meant to be done. But what's also very noticeable are the things that they don't debate about,
Hmm.
the things that everyone knows, the things that that is actually and we'll see in a second what is the oral law. There's actually you could talk about three different parts of the oral law. Okay, you can talk about the first part, which is we can call it the received part. Okay, the received part is the part that was taught right away, and this is like the explanation of the mitzvos, right? How do you actually do it? What does it mean not to work on Shabbos, right? Are you going to go stone someone, which is the punishment for working on Shabbos? Of course, caveat that's obviously with the Sanhedrin of 71 judges who convict him unanimously with two witnesses and two warnings, basically impossible, whatever it is. Point is, that's the punishment officially. Are you going to go administer that based on your own personal interpretation of what the law is? Obviously not. Obviously, there has to be a definition, a strict definition of what is violation of Shabbos. So that's kind of the received part. So the received part is anything that Moshe actually taught us is what the mitzvah means, how to read this Torah, how do you read this verse. You can talk about the letters of the Torah and how to pronounce them and how to and what they mean. That's received, obviously, right? Otherwise, like you couldn't have just made that up. That has to be received. There's a famous story with Hillel. Hillel and Shammai. Shammai and Hillel. They have a couple of these stories in the Talmud where someone wanted to convert. So he comes to Shammai, and Shammai he says to Shammai, I want to convert, but I only want to learn the written Torah. I don't have any business. I don't want to, I really don't believe in your oral tradition of what the Torah means. Just teach me the Torah. I find it meaningful. I don't want the other stuff. And Shammai chased him out. Okay. This isn't the first time he's had to chase out a convert. Maybe it was even the same convert. but he goes to Hillel and he says, teach me he says the same request, and Hillel sits down with him and starts teaching him Aleph Beis. And the next day, he starts teaching him Aleph Beis, but he actually reverses everything. He says the Tuf is an Aleph. He says the Aleph is a Tuf. He says the Dalet is a Beis. And he just starts teaching him the opposite of yesterday. And the guy says, Hillel, you taught me the opposite yesterday. Why? What are you doing? And Hillel says, just like you trust me on the letters, on what they are, you can also trust me on what the Torah means. Basically, like you're picking and choosing. It's irrational to pick and choose what you believe Judaism actually was able to transmit and wasn't able to transmit. So anyways, that's just the story in the Talmud. So you see, from the beginning, we had these issues. Anyways, so the first part is received. Maimonides actually says there is no debate in the received part of the Torah. Meaning, if you see debate, if something is debatable, it's not received. It's the next part. It's derived. Derived, so now, not every situation could have been preempted, and not every nuance could have been explained in the desert to Moses, and from Moses to the elders or whatever, right? It's not possible. So you have a system of deriving meaning and deriving information out of the actual verses, not just by reading it and figuring out, but there's actually rules of how to analyze them that were part of the received tradition, right? So we actually have this formula that is used in the Talmud or in the Mishnah to actually derive laws out of them. And this method was empowered to all the transmitters of the tradition to derive and to appoint, right? Moses. You see, Moses appointed legal authorities to figure out, to derive things from the law in every generation. So you could see on page 14 in Deuteronomy where it talks about this legal authority of the sages, the leaders of the Jewish people, to derive their laws. If regarding the matters of dispute within your local courts, a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over blood, civil law, or legions, You must rise up and ascend to the supreme judge in that era. You should inquire. They must inform you of the correct verdict in this case. You must carry out the verdict that is announced to you, observing scrupulously all the instructions to you. You must act in accordance with the instructions they give you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate to the right or to the left from the rulings that they announce to you. This is referring to the authority of the kind of the Torah scholars, the leaders of in any given generation to tell you what the law is, to tell you to announce to kind of decide what the proper course of action is. Okay, so there'll be an example of the derived part soon, so make it clearer, I think. The third part is legislated. Okay, this is also something that this is also the situations that arise where the sages saw fit to legislate to protect Torah law or to mitigate against some issue in society. That's called tikkun olam. That type of legislation. There's different types of legislation. There's actually rules for how they're allowed to legislate and what they're not allowed to what they can't legislate and what they can legislate. It's not carte blanche. There's actually very interesting conditions. If the community is not able to sustain the legislation, then it basically is evaporated. But there's different qualifications. But the point is that the sages make decrees. The sages make ordinances. They decided that chicken and milk should not be eaten together, even though biblically it is only talking about meat. Right? So that's an example of a decree. That's the purpose is to enhance Judaism, enhance Jewish life, and to make sure that and we'll learn a deeper reason why the Torah even works this way. But all of these three things, the fact that they exist, the fact that that this is the way that God wants us to observe and learn Torah, that's also part of the received tradition, right? That understanding of what Judaism is part of the oral Torah, right? So that's just what was handed down to us as
So
this is
can I
what
ask you a
Judaism is.
question?
Sure.
The legislative part
Yeah.
is a reasonable interpretation of the written and oral law as it was received.
Actually, it's not an interpretation, it's an extension. It's not claiming to be God-given. It's claiming to be given by the sages for us to listen to the sages. And we are told by the Torah to listen to our sages, whoever they may be. Yeah. So now there is a difference there are differences in the ramifications of a biblical law versus a rabbinic law. If there's a doubt regarding a situation and it's a biblical law, you have to err on the side of caution. But if it's a doubt for a rabbinic law, then usually we will be lenient, go towards the leniency. Let's if you don't know something is kosher or whatever, and it's talking about a rabbinic situation of kosher, so you'll be lenient. Versus if it's a biblical issue, you'll be stringent.
Is the legislative part,
Yeah.
is that continuing to this day?
Yes.
Do you have new sages that
Yes.
reinterpret things?
Yes. There's a big difference though. Legislation by a shul rabbi in Bayside, who is that going to affect? His members. If the Sanhedrin or the men of the Great Assembly make a legislation, who's that going to affect? The entire Jewish people. Why? Because they have authority over the entire Jewish people. It's recognized authority. It's 71 of the judges of who are these people? They're people who their teacher, whose teacher was Moses.
Mhm.
And the Rambam, Maimonides, actually lists everyone from him to Moses of who transmitted the teachings, right? So those people who are directly in that line, that chain, that kind of this golden chain of transition, they're telling you, they know, they have an authority, they know what what God's will is, what the Torah is supposed to be saying, they know how to figure it out, and they know how to. Now, later generations don't have that. They don't have that qualification. They just don't. So edicts will have a less impact on the Jewish people as a whole.
Yes, however, as humankind evolves, there are new things. Let me just throw you an example. Is lab-grown meat kosher?
Right. So someone will have to decide that,
Yes.
but it won't affect the whole Jewish people.
Okay,
It'll only affect that guy's constituents.
okay.
He can't go and the moment Jewish people spread out all over the world, right? Every shtetl, every European town had different laws, not on a huge fundamental level. Why not? Why was it so fundamentally the same, but they had little nuances? Because of the Talmud. The Talmud was that final kind of
Sorry.
legislative thing. Like everything is from there, from that on. Nothing else was. Maybe the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law, maybe that also had a impact, but that was because of its popularity, not because of its like binding. Like this was binding on the Jewish people. Like the Jewish people took this as like this is the only trace that we still have of that transition from Moses. I mean, this is it. They put it in this book, and now that it's in this book, that's where it is. That's what it is. So everything that we learn, derive, and study about that tradition is going to be in there. Like it's not going to be anywhere else, really. Yeah.
I don't, so Steinsaltz in his introduction to Talmud says
Yeah.
that Talmud is all about halachic debate,
Yeah.
but it's not a source of halacha.
Meaning it's not a source for a
No,
daily.
That's not a,
It's not your daily driver for halachic.
you can't use it for halachic decision.
You can't use it for halachic decisions, but there are the halacha is you can learn a piece of Gemara all the way down to the halacha, meaning it stems directly from the Gemara. It's just that you're not going to be able to make a decision from the Gemara, but you'll need a few other books
Okay.
in between the Gemara and the halacha. So if you read the Shulchan Aruch that you just bought, right, the from the Alter Rebbe, and he's buying them for everyone, by the way. If you want one, see,
Somebody behind me?
you might have to wait. You might have to wait till the sale next year. Okay, but no, but in the footnotes you'll see just many quotes from the Gemara. That's his sources. I mean, now depending on your level of scholarship, you'll be able to see halacha in the Gemara, but most people can't. You have to know all of it in order to get anything out of it. That's the problem. Yeah.
Shulchan Aruch is like going from like what you're saying is like the Talmud to the code of law that we live by on a day-to-day basis. They were like significant developments over the centuries, where like the Torah, all these like commentators took it and actually started translating into action. So that's the work that they've done.
Yeah,
The reason they had to do that work,
That's
though,
great.
but the reason they had to do that work is because in order to get halakha, and the Rambam writes this the Maimonides writes this in an introduction to his work, which is a halachic work. What he did is he distilled all the laws out of the Talmud. He decided which ones were correct, meaning there were different opinions, and he chose some of them based on his teaching, the teachings of his teachers, and he wrote a book with no arguments in it, just the law, no sources, and they burned it because there were no sources. By the way. Speaking of burning books, the Jews burnt Rambam before. Yeah, we learned it from the other religions. But the point is, trauma is internalized, and then we basically, I don't. But either way, but the reason you needed all those people in between is because in order to take a halacha out of the Gemara, you need to know the entire Gemara and have the traditional understanding of it from your teachers received, meaning you had to be not only a genius, like a once-in-a-generation genius, which, by the way, throughout history, we've had hundreds of these people in every generation, which is incredible to understand. They're 12-year-olds. Today's Hayom Yom, today's daily, or yesterday's, we read every day a little section of some little words that the Rebbe wrote, and based on the calendar. And he said that the Alter Rebbe, who wrote his own Shulchan Aruch, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he was 12 years old, he was, I don't know, but the point is he finished the entire Gemara when as a teenager. So these people were we had a handful of those types of people in every generation. This is who the Jewish people kind of elevated to the highest status. These were our sports stars and our politicians and our the Talmud scholars. So and their brilliance was unmatched, and they needed that in order to be able to receive all of it make a practical laws and convey it to people, right? And so all those other books that came in between were basically doing that for us. They basically were saying, okay, no one's going to sit and read the entire Talmud. So the Rambam Maimonides said, people are forgetting the rules, and they're definitely forgetting how to learn Talmud. They don't have time for it, right? They're busy running for their lives. So I'm writing a book. It's a shortcut. You don't need to, you just, you're good. That's what his goal was.
The Cliff Notes for it.
Yeah. And it's very nuanced, very brilliant, and people study it very, very much
Yes, okay, hello, from it.
because we don't hold it. But if you're Yemenite, you can. We have a different source of halacha because the Rambam is a different. Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on. Okay. So just to summarize, we have the received, derived, legislated. So when we talk about the matzah law that we learned, right? Written law says eat matzah on the night of Passover. Then you go to received law, a minimum of an olive. So it says that how much matzah do you have to eat? You have to eat a minimum of an olive-sized quantity of matzah. All right, that would be something that is received, meaning how much matzah, how much food is eating. What is called eating? So we have received a tradition that you have to eat the size of an olive. Which how do you calculate that? And are there different sizes? And what is it based on? What's the size of an olive? Maybe that's debated, but we know that it has to be the size of an olive. And that's the volume. You have to basically grind up the matzah and you can't keep whatever. It's mostly air, so you have to calculate the volume. Anyways, derived law, Passover matzah can only be baked from types of flour that can possibly turn into leavened bread. Okay. Let's actually look at text in 15, on page 15, text 7. In the first month, it says in the Torah, all it says in the Torah is in the first month on the 14th day of that month in the evening you shall eat matzos. Okay, so that's the written Torah. I kind of skipped that piece, right? Yeah.
In the later years, did they also eat it with like meat and maror,
Mhm.
or was that only the year that Hashem told them?
They ate it they ate it every. It was always It was always that was the mitzvah always. It says in the first month because it's saying the first month is actually Nisan, not Tishrei. The first month is Nisan. So it's saying in the first month, which is Nisan, on the 14th day, you should eat matzah. But it doesn't say how much to eat. It doesn't say what it could be made out of and everything like that. Later, there's a debate in the Talmud about what it could be made out of. Can it be baked from flour that's made out of rice? Well, some say yes, some say no. Why can't it be made out of rice? Well, because rice can't be leavened. There's no leavening in rice. It doesn't have gluten, right? So it doesn't. You would have to use some binding agent and some yeast and stuff to make it leaven. It doesn't naturally go with water. So because it doesn't, it can't be used for matzah. Now, how do they know that it needs to be leavenable? Is that a word? It has to be leavenable in order to be considered used for matzah. That's counterintuitive, no? You would think matzah should be something that's impossible to become leaven.
No, that follows from the story.
It's followed from the story, yeah. That's good.
Because the bread that they were making before they left Egypt was going to be leavened, and they stopped that
Right.
because
That's a very good point. That's not even the way they know, though. The
oh,
way they know is because of derived law. They use something called a hekesh, which is one of the ways of deriving things out of the Torah. It's when two things are just juxtaposed in the Torah, but there's no obvious reason why they are put together, put next to each other. You can learn out the laws from the fact that they're there. Now, if you were to not have any tradition and you were to just try to learn laws using this idea, you would get lost. So obviously there has to be some tradition as to how to apply this.
mhm.
So it's not just these laws are like you can just apply them like in a vacuum and figure them out. I'm going way over time. Okay. But so it's interesting though. I looked up this Gemara. This is very interesting. I looked up this Gemara where they're talking about rice and stuff like that. And it starts talking about if you can make chametz, if you can make chametz on paste out of fruit juice. So somebody's opinion was fruit juice does not make chametz. You can't make chametz out of fruit juice. But the way that it was showing the discussion I thought I could pull it up, but I have a different computer. I can't use this one. I don't know how to, but the way that it was framing the discussion was very interesting, and it shows you a lot about how the Talmud was transmitted. It says like this: Rabbi Huna and Rabbi Papa was sitting in front of their teacher. It doesn't say their teacher. It was sitting in front of Rabbi Rav Adin or something. I forgot his name. And and he was sleeping. That's what it says. And he was sleeping. And they start discussing. Then they have a whole Talmudic discussion about how to make leaven out of, if you can make it out of fruit juice and if it's considered leaven, whatever. And then after their whole discussion, the person they were sitting in front of wakes up and says says the law and starts telling them what the actual reasoning is. Why did he record that? Who cares if he was sleeping and then he woke up? What? Just say the law. Just say this guy says this guy says this, and this guy says this. Why are they saying a whole discussion in front of a sleeping guy? The guy wakes up, and it just gives you the experience. I'm just telling you this because when you're learning Gemara, you're in their world. You're not just reading things that people said. You're really immersed in the things. Sometimes you'll see that you'll see an argument. All of a sudden, it will say one of the guys got really embarrassed and he just left because he was like, it's like you're like literally in the room. It's obviously there's another reason why they mentioned the sleeping, because they would, if he was awake, they wouldn't have had any of this discussion. Because if you know anything about the people who are talking here, they're the students of this guy. They're not going to start talking about their reason why something is happening in front of their teacher. Their teacher will just tell them the answer, right? So in order for that, to give permission, basically, for them to have this discussion, he had to be sleeping. And from the discussion, we learn critical things about other areas of Torah. That's why it's there. And we'll learn more about all of the discussions and how they teach us other things later. There's so much here. I don't know how much to do and not to do. So let's go. I'm gonna start moving. Yeah.
How did they legislate the reclining thing? The next line?
Ah, okay. Then you get legislation. Where is that? Did you see that?
Page 15.
Okay, yeah. Then they legislated on top of eating matzah. How do you eat matzah? So they said to eat it in a leaning position. You should eat it reclined. So they used to sit on these sofas or whatever, and much more comfortable way to eat. And you should not sit like, like you're constrained and you're nervous. You should sit relaxed and free, and to symbolize the freedom. Why did they legislate that? I don't know. That's why I'm not in the business of changing these things. I will never know the depth and the reason, and I'm not going to go and contradict someone who's part of the carrier and of the responsibility of transmitting what Moses said. I'm definitely not in that regard. I can give you some ideas though, right? A lot of what the sages did, one of the things they did is they always tried to create they thought of ways to improve and to maximize the purpose of things. And they did this a lot in Shabbos. You can see this a lot in Shabbos. The whole idea of muktzah was all rabbinic. It's a whole rabbinic concoction, and it creates this entire environment of Shabbos. It's like incredible. With the leaning, right? You're creating a sensibility with your body. You're showing it on your body that you're free. It's not enough to say some things in the Haggadah and to read some liturgy. It has to be apparent. It has to be experienced. Your kids have to see it. Look, Dad is actually free. He looks free. He doesn't look the same as he always does. He usually looks like a hunched over guy who now he's like sitting with wine, and that has an impression on the people around you and yourself. So the sages were thinking, how could we make this experience more? We know what it's meant to be. How can we maximize that?
So the body reflects the intent of the law.
Exactly. So that's just what a lot of the rules that sages made are around that, not just protection, but also enhancement. Yeah.
It says that they didn't have enough time to make the matzah and they just put it in their bags. So then how did it become like matzah instead of just like a clump of dough?
Didn't they try to bake it, but they couldn't bake it for a very long period of time?
Yeah, I think they rolled it out and they had a nice flat matzah with holes in it, and then they just put it on they just slapped it on their back, which is how they carried it, and then it just baked on their back. I think that's what happened. But yeah, good question. But I mean, maybe the movie Ten Commandments, he should see it. No? Okay. All right.
I think what happens is that he has a certain shelf life, you could almost say.
Yeah.
Once it starts to go 11, if you let it go too long, then it won't completely rise.
Right.
It starts to reverse
Yeah.
in its chemistry.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. So, it might have started originally to be 11 bread, but then because it sat in their sacks for so long, then
Yeah.
just reversed its course. It's kind of like a soda. Once you open it, you only have so much fizz, right? And if you leave it out for overnight, when you go drink it in the morning, it won't have fizz anymore. Now, I mean, it might have a little bit, but it won't have the same amount of fizz that it had the day before.
Thank you. So we see how different parts of the oral Torah, it's not just one big book that was written at once and we all got it in it. Obviously it developed. And obviously it's a living thing that changes and morphs and builds on, but there's also a structure and there's also a tradition of how to learn, and there's a lot to learn in order to be able to effectively understand it. All right? Is that clear? Okay. So, and a lot of the legislation happened throughout Jewish history. You have some things Moses legislated, some things King David legislated. A lot of it was Ezra. Most of the structural things that you see in a synagogue was all Ezra and his men of the Great Assembly. Just the siddur and the basic Shemona Esrei was from Ezra. A lot of things were later in the Talmud. So all the like structure of Judaism, all that stuff that you know, Hanukkah, menorahs, and all that stuff, it's all rabbinic. That's all stuff that was added. Okay. But we treat the things that the sages added as important, if not more in some ways, and we'll learn mystically why it would be more than the actual written Torah. Okay. Now we'll talk more about question 2, why it's so important to study Torah. Why is it so important to study Talmud? Okay. And why, like you said, you can't really learn all of this. You can't learn halacha out of it, right? So why am I spending my time studying it? Why are there thousands of Jews who study a page of this every day, finish it every 7 years? Why is this done? Why in yeshiva? When I was in yeshiva, we learned this for 12 hours a day. Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. Okay, so it says in just generally about Torah, right? Right, there's 3 pillars that the world stands on. It says in the Mishnah and Avos. Shimon the righteous is one of the last surviving, text 9, page 18. Shimon the righteous is one of the last surviving figures of the men of the great assembly. He used to say, the world stands upon 3 things: the Torah, the service, and acts of loving kindness. Service means prayer, or it used to be the temple sacrifices, but things that are kind of our connection to God. Kindness is our connection to other people, and Torah. Now, why is books of laws, figuring out the instruction manual, one of the pillars of the world? Why, I could see why it's necessary, but why is it so foundational? Okay. So in exercise 1.1 on page 19, it says to identify 3 efforts. Let's do 1 that you made to study material that was not Torah or any other Jewish learning, some educational book, video, whatever, and summarize the nature of the material and the purpose of pursuing that information. So basically, think of something, the last thing you learned that was, and why you learned it. What was the purpose of learning it? Anyone have a?
How to adjust, how to watch it.
Okay, why? Good. All right. Fine. So you'll learn something. Why? Because you want to know something, or you're interested in the topic in general, right? You want to acquire a skill for a hobby or something that you're interested in, or you want to be inspired by something. And obviously the Torah has all of that. The Torah does have a lot of inspiration, a lot of instructions, a lot of fascinating theology, right? Those are all reasons why someone would want to learn the Torah. But the fact that it's so central to Jewish life, you'd think we spend most of the time learning about maybe Jewish history or development of the Jewish people or theology. Somebody was once telling me, he was asking me these theological questions and I was answering him. I was a teenager and I was answering him. I was very arrogant in the way that I was answering him. And he said, he's like, what do you expect from me? You guys spend all day learning about these questions. He's asking me about some theological things like philosophical. And I'm like, bro, I've never spent 1 minute in yeshiva learning this. They don't teach us any philosophy or any theology. We only learn divorce law. And he did not believe me. He thought I was joking. That year I was learning Gittin, divorce law. So it's the guy was blown away. Like, why are you doing that? We in our field, in our seminaries, we're learning about, the tenets of our religion. So what's going on here? And Maimonides brings this idea here. He says in text 10, page 20, he talks about the breakdown of how someone should spend their time studying Torah. The time allotted to study should be divided into 3 parts. A third should be written law, so literally just a chumash, a Bible. A third to the oral law, and the last third should be spent in reflection, deducing conclusions from premises, developing implications of statements, comparing statements, and studying the hermeneutical principles by which the Torah is interpreted until one knows the essence of these principles and how to deduce what is permitted and what is forbidden from what one has learned by tradition. The latter topic is called Gemara. So basically, if you see what he's saying to learn, he's saying oral law. Basically, I think he means the received part. And the next part is like how to deduce things, like to learn so in depth that you're able to not just know what it's saying, but you're able to actually then deduce, which is a very high level of knowledge. And so it's 2/3 Talmud study. 2/3 is how we're supposed to spend our time. So, yeah.
So therefore, the Mishnah part in the Talmud consists only of written and oral law. Is that correct?
Well, besides for because there's some stories in the Mishnah also. It's not pure halacha, but yeah, most of it, much more than that's basically most of it, yeah. As opposed to what you're saying, as opposed to like stories and stuff.
The rest of it is the
Yeah.
Gemara, which is
Yeah.
what he's talking about now.
Right.
Trying to
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
the Mishnah.
You can't really learn the Mishnah without the Gemara because it's very, 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 very terse. It was written like that on purpose, like super succinct and brief. And if you're learning just Mishnayos, which is just Mishnah, if you just learning a book of Mishnah, which people do for spiritual reasons, you have to read the commentary to know what it's saying. And the commentary culls from the Gemara and basically tells you what the Gemara's conclusion and commentary on that Mishnah was. Basically, yeah. Like, you wanted to say something?
I mean, the Mishnah is so terse that people memorize it.
Exactly. It was meant to be memorized.
Yeah.
It's actually written. Yeah. Yeah. It's actually written. He even wrote it down in a way that it was memorizable. And until today, we encourage our children, we reward them for everything that they memorize, every tractate that they memorize. And so many children have learned the entire thing by heart and forgotten it when, by the time they figured out how to play video games. And then but it's so cool how it's written because they structure it in ways that are logically you're able to memorize it better. Like things are sometimes out of order so that they're more memorizable. And the Gemara is like, why is it out of order? And it's because it's easier to memorize. The flow. They want it to be an easy flow. Very cool. So one reason why you can suggest an emphasis on studying law is because the main thing in Judaism is action. We need people like theology and feeling God and all that stuff is great. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're doing the right things and that we're doing what God wants us to do. So we have to learn about it. So Judaism is such an action-centric faith and ideology. So we need to get it right. So we need to learn it. yeah, you'd think we'd be all into faith and theology and behaviors, but really action is not all that matters, but it's really super, super, super central. Um, and we're talking about actions between each other and actions between us and God, which this is the main part of Jewish religion, right? You could see in the Mishnah in Avot, the primacy of action, text 11 on page 21. So the study is not the principal goal, but rather the action. It's action that so study is the principal goal. The action is the principal. Why do we study? In order to act. We're about to contradict that. This is true, yes, but
Why
yeah.
do we say, public Torah can?
Keneged kulam. But why is that? Because it leads to action. Why is Torah study the most important thing? It says because it leads to action. So action is really the thing that really, and by the way, we'll see the deeper understanding of this in a second, but just practically, if you want to be someone that is conscious of how to behave all the time and to have an awareness of if you want to align yourself constantly with a certain way of being and a consciousness and the will of God, you probably should learn. The more time you spend studying it, the more of a part of you it is, and the more you're able to actually act on it. Right? It's very hard to act on something that you saw once or twice and were inspired for 10 minutes. Right? But if you live with it and you have a regular studying sessions with it, that's something that you can actually live with. And that's kind of the idea of why it's so important to study in order to act. It leads directly to action. But let's talk about the spiritual benefits of Talmud study. There's got to be something more to it. How do I know that? Because the things we're studying are largely like theoretical sometimes, not just theoretical. Some of them are impossible, right? Because let's say I'm studying about the Talmud, like how to sacrifice stuff. Like there's nothing, or let's say I'm studying some obscure situation, or I'm studying something. I'm not just studying the things that I need to know right now to live as a Jew. It's not what it is. And I don't need to know it on this depth. So obviously there's something else going on here. There's something more. There's something deeper about why we're studying all of this. Not the whole picture. There's an interrogation. There's notes from an interrogation of the first Lubavitch Rebbe. He was arrested by the Russian government, and he was by the Tsarist government, and they interrogated him. We have the notes from the interrogation. It's in the old files in the archives, and so it's interesting. He actually talked about this idea of look how he talks about of Torah study, of Talmud study, in text 12, page 23. That which we refer to in our Russian language as Boga, Malitzia, divine service, is divided by all of us Jews into two parts. When we say divine service, we actually mean two things. This is what a Jew does. This is what you want to ask a Jew. What is divine service? The first is the reading and studying of the scriptures, Talmud, Midrashim, and their commentaries, as well as the study of the legal codes that summarize the laws of the Talmud. And the second aspect is the concept of prayer. So what is Judaism? He said this is divine service. These two things. So what's striking about the Alter Rebbe's language is that he's including learning Torah as the service, serving God, right? You're not learning how to serve God, right? You're not learning what God wants from you to then do. When you're learning, you are serving God. What's with that, right? It's a very unique perspective of learning. It's not just a means to an end, but it's an end in and of itself. So part of our religious worship is learning Torah. So this is the idea, basically. When a person comprehends an idea, right, you can say that the idea is being contained in their mind. They're kind of absorbing it, they're internalizing it, and they're making it part of themselves, right? And the Torah, what kind of ideas is the Torah, right? So we could say you're intellectually grasping the concept. The ideas in the Torah are God's will and wisdom, meaning that there's a part of God that you are grasping when you are internalizing and learning and reading Torah. When you're absorbing it on this level, you're actually getting into God's mind, so to speak. Now, God is a very lofty, infinite being, way above anything that has to do with this world. But God has a will that he's distilling, that he's transforming and putting and packaging in the Torah for us to be able to comprehend. And every time we figure out or we glean some truth in the Torah, and the process of getting to that truth is figuring out God. And that process is holy. That process is serving God. We're learning about God. Because when we put learning about God, doesn't just mean learning about God. You're actually becoming one with God. You're unifying your mind and you're syncing, you're synchronizing with God. You're synchronizing God's will with your mind. If you look at how the first Lubavitcher Rebbe puts it in Tanya, chapter 5, text 13, page 24. Halacha is God's wisdom and will. For so it arose in God's will that if, for example, Reuven pleads in one way and Shimon in another way, the verdict should be such and such. Now, it's possible that this particular litigation never occurred in reality, nor is it ever destined to be presented for judgment as these precise disputes and claims. Nevertheless, God's will and wisdom has determined that in the event of a person pleading this way and the other litigant pleading that way, the verdict should be such and such. So you're learning, what if this thing happens that didn't happen yet, or maybe never will happen, but we're learning something about God and we're turning that into something that we understand about God. Accordingly, when we study, understand, and properly comprehend with our intellect the details of such a scenario in accordance with the law presented in the Mishnah, Gemara, or Poskim, we have thereby comprehended, grasped, and encompassed with our intellect the will and wisdom of God. We have effectively understood something that the one who no thought can grasp, whose will and wisdom are beyond understanding, until they are invested within the laws that have been set out for us. So the idea is that God planted himself into the Torah, and that's what we're absorbing and learning when we learn. Now, so in a sense, we could say the 1 hour of study of Torah is 1 hour with God. You're not just sitting there learning so that you can know more, but you're engaged in a dialogue with truth, with God. And that's why there's so much passion surrounding it. That's why there's so much investment and so much toil, and because you're striving to get a glimmer of truth. You're trying to work out the right thing, because if you get that, you're understanding, you're clarifying, you're seeing God. This is a picture that it's a very controversial picture. This is the Rebbe learning. There's no other picture like this, because this is in the Rebbe's private room that someone took this through the keyhole. That guy ended up being very, apologetic about publicizing this. It wasn't meant to be publicized. It was an accident. But now that it's publicized, you might as well see it. So the Rebbe is in front of a Talmud. They don't make books that size in any other thing. Yeah. Or maybe a Shulchan Aruch, right? The Rebbe's sitting there. He's standing. He's not sitting. And his hands behind his back. The Rebbe only learned standing. That's a fact. Not where he learned in the car. He learned from the Gemara, or whatever, and from the Rambam. But normally, when the Rebbe was standing when he was learning. But anyways, that's just an interesting picture, because he's not just learning. He's talking to God. He's connecting to God in a very intimate way, and it's very serious. It's not a theoretical entertainment. No, this is a moment to have, and the deeper you invest yourself, and the more difficult it is, and the more you're breaking your head, the more intense the union is. The more you're getting into it, because it's not just a superficial meeting. Now it's like a full-on engagement. There's another angle here, though. When you learn about some mundane thing, about like the kashrus of a certain animal, or the lungs, or something that makes it kosher, or some detail, right? That's hardly relevant to your life. You're actually doing something to that topic. You're affecting the world that you're learning about. You're learning about cows. You're learning about some kashrus issue. So everything in this world contains godliness. God created everything, and everything in some way has godly energy in it. And there's a godly aspect that's being concealed by reality. And when you learn God's version of what he wants to happen with reality, when you learn that the cow, when it's like this and the other thing and like that, and whatever happens to him and his leg is broken, now it's not kosher anymore. When you learn that, what are you doing? You're turning that cow, broken leg situation into a godly, you're not turning it into, you're revealing the godly, what God's investment is in that thing. You're extracting it. And you're exposing it, and you're elevating, sitting from this room with your Gemara, you're actually elevating reality. You're uplifting something from just a plain material, tangible, animate thing into something that you can see God in. It's something that connects you to God, and therefore you're connecting the whole thing to God. So really, all the topics that we're learning about, we're elevating them. So Torah study elevates the mundane. It has an actual effect on your environment and on yourself. That's the key. Look at the text 14. This is talked about by the Tanya also, but not the Tanya, sorry, the author of the Tanya, but it's in a totally different book called Torah Or, which is a book about it talks about every parsha, every part of the Torah has a Hasidic explanation, and he goes through each parsha. So Torah Or is part of that. A butcher who chops an animal's limbs into pieces and processes its innards is nothing more than a butcher. By contrast, someone who occupies themselves with understanding the specific details of Jewish law associated with the limbs of the animal, laws that facilitate the ability to distinguish between an animal that is kosher for consumption and one that is disqualified, treifa, that person is revealing and clarifying the divine will and wisdom. So you can have a butcher, and you can have a butcher that's a Talmud scholar. It's the same butcher, the same actions, totally different meaning and relevance and effect on reality. And that's really what God wants. God wants us to be butchers, but godly butchers. Mm-hmm. So we're doing gory stuff, but we're making it godly. Make the gory godly. That's the key. There's a limit to that idea, by the way. Don't go crazy with it. All right. Anyway, so yeah, that's the basic idea. So we'll talk about the key points, but next week we'll talk. The next 5 weeks we're going to encounter some intricate Talmudic discussions. So if you want to leave, now is the chance, because we're going to get into the weeds. We will find ourselves toiling over the question of whether the prohibition to eat on Passover even begins 3 hours before sundown, or 2 or half hours before sundown. And then we'll struggle with all the exact circumstances and of the employer. We'll go into all those cases that we brought up and figure out all these things, and really understand Talmudic thinking, how it works, and how we understand things and how we develop things, and how do we get closer to the divine will and divine mind through this process. And we'll learn about that too. We're not going to just say this, but we'll actually understand. There's more to explain about this. Like, why is this the way that divine will is manifesting in our world? Why is there so much debate? Why? All that stuff will be explained throughout the next 5 lessons. We'll see the key points, and you're dismissed.
Lesson 1. The Jewish people and the Talmud. 1. The Talmud has influenced every facet of Jewish culture. Its study has been and remains a source of joy for Jewish communities worldwide. One historian suggested that the Talmud is responsible for the Jews having survived their long exile. 2. The Talmud is primarily a record of halacha, Jewish law, which covers every facet of Jewish life, thereby allowing Jews to connect with God in whatever they are doing. 3. Although the written Torah is a source of Jewish law, the vast majority of Jewish law is not explicitly recorded in it. God taught these laws orally to Moses when he gave us the entirety of the Torah at Mount Sinai. 4. In addition to laws received by Moses directly from God, the oral law contains laws that were derived by the sages from the Torah's text, as well as laws legislated by the sages over the generations. 5. The famous Jewish devotion to learning is rooted in the tremendous spiritual significance attributed to Torah study, to the extent that it is considered one of the three pillars on which the world stands. Although most Jews are not lawyers or judges, the study of Talmud, Jewish law, occupies a large portion of traditional Jewish study. 6. Jews view the study of law as a mode of religious worship because the laws are the will and wisdom of God. When we absorb Torah law with our minds, we are bonding with a sliver of the divine mind. 7. When we study a Torah law on a given subject, we bring the divine wisdom contained in that law into contact with that subject. And since Jewish law's scope is so broad and that it encompasses every facet of our lives, studying halacha brings holiness into every facet of our lives.
That's a wrap. Thank you for coming, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Yeah.
I like this guy because he's just smiling the whole time. Yeah, what's your question?
Okay, so you said earlier that the oral law was prohibited to be written down, at least initially.
At some point.